night in your hour than we're going to in the debate because there's so many people up there.
But, you know, everybody's going to try to maximize their word count.
Yes, and then there's all the interruptions and all of that. Julian Castro is going to join us in this hour, and he might just get more time here than he ends up getting at the debate. But it has been fascinating to see, even with those constraints, how candidates like Julian Castro and others have been able to have their moment, have been able to have that spot where they pop in the debates, and the pressure's all the greater on this next round.
I mean, even with just the first debate is the only one under our belt so far, we've already seen the impact that that debate can have on the fortunes of individual candidates. The stakes couldn't be higher. 2 weeks away. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Lawrence.
Well, presidential candidate Julian Castro will join us tonight, as I just said. This week, he has given the strongest and clearest statement ever made by a presidential candidate about police use of force. Now, I've been writing about this subject since the 1980s when I published a book called Deadly Force about police use of deadly force. And I can tell you that most presidential candidates in our history have never mentioned the subject, including most modern presidential candidates. So Julian Castro does not have much competition for the strongest statement ever made by a presidential candidate on this subject, but he has done that. He has delivered that. And he delivered it about the Eric Garner case in New York City. He will be on the debate stage with the mayor of New York City, who has ultimate jurisdiction over the Eric Garner case here and what happens to the police officer in that case. And we will discuss that with Julian Castro at the end of this hour tonight. We'll get his reaction to President Trump today, pretending that he disagreed with his rally crowd last night, chanting "send her back." Julian Castro will be on that debate stage in 2 weeks with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and 7 other presidential candidates. It will be a difficult stage for all of those candidates. Julian Castro performed strongly in the first round of debates and will surely be in the thick of it the second time around. Julian Castro actually made his national television debut as a possible presidential candidate on this program when he announced that he was exploring a presidential run, and we're glad to welcome him back tonight. And we begin tonight with what the president did today. What the president did today is news, but it is not new. It is not new to see the president lying, provably lying as he did today. The president lied today knowing that everywhere except the Fox propaganda channel, we would be showing you the video that proves the president was lying to America today. And that isn't new. He's done that before. What is new is the president finding fault with his own supporters, saying he wasn't happy with them, doesn't agree with what they did at his rally last night when his 15-minute lying rant about 4 members of Congress took his audience right up to the edge where they started chanting, "Send her back," about one of those members of Congress.
Mr. President, if I may, when your supporters last night were chanting "send her back," why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you ask them to stop saying that?
Well, number one, I think I did. I started speaking very quickly. It really was a loud, I disagree with it, by the way, but it was quite a chant. And I felt a little bit badly about it, but I will say this, I did, and I started speaking very quickly, but it started up rather fast, as you probably noticed.
So you'll tell your supporters never to...
Well, I would say that. I was not happy with it. I disagree with it. But again, I didn't do with it.
Now, Donald Trump knows that we are going to examine it, and he knows exactly what we're going to find. Why didn't you ask them to stop saying that? Well, number one, I think I did. Here's the president last night lying about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar as he pushes the audience to the logical point of their chant.
And obviously and importantly, Omar has a history of launching vicious anti-Semitic screeds. And she talked about...
There it is, the proof of the lie. And a few minutes later, last night, the president said this.
Tonight I have a suggestion for the hate-filled extremists who are constantly trying to tear our country down. They never have anything good to say. That's why I say, hey, if they don't like it, let them leave. Let them leave. Let them leave. They're always telling us how to run it, how to do this, how to do... You know what? If they don't love it, tell them to leave it.
Last night, the Trump audience was just following the president's lead, saying what they were sure he wanted to hear. They were simply echoing what they already heard from him. But today, maybe enough Republicans must have privately found a way to get the president to pretend that he disagreed with what his crowd said last night. There has been much comparison today to the John McCain moment in the 2008 presidential campaign and how much better presidential candidate John McCain handled that moment than Donald Trump ever could or would.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues.
Boy, you just can't watch that enough these days. John McCain says, no, ma'am. And he reaches in and he takes that microphone away. And John McCain has gotten a lot of well-deserved credit for that moment over the years. But here's the most important thing about it. At that time in American politics, any other response by a presidential nominee was unthinkable, absolutely unthinkable. What John McCain said then was what most members of the United States Senate would have said in those same circumstances at that time. John McCain's decency level was not higher than average for United States senators during his time in the United States Senate. But now that Mitch McConnell has driven decency out of the Republican side of the United States Senate, it's hard to remember the way things were before the Trump-McConnell alliance. But we still have examples of politicians who know exactly what to do when they don't like what their supporters in a crowd are doing or chanting or saying. They don't make the excuse that the audience misbehavior just started too fast for them to handle, and they don't lie after the fact about what happened. Here is an example of that. Here is one of the congresswomen who President Trump has been attacking for days now and attacked last night. Here's one of those congresswomen stopping her own supporters in an audience when she didn't like their reaction to someone who was disagreeing with her in a town hall about climate change hosted by Chris Hayes.
Can we come back maybe to universal basic income a little bit later?
Hey, that's unacceptable, and that's the difference between me and Trump.
Yeah. That's good. I appreciate that.
Decency still lives. Decency lives in the 4 congresswomen who Donald Trump attacked for his audience last night, and the congresswoman who Donald Trump's supporters want to send back. Actually went back to her congressional district today, and here was the scene when Congresswoman Ilhan Omar arrived, and the president of the Center for American Progress, and Renee Graham, an associate editor and opinion columnist for the Boston Globe. And Nir, I want to get your reaction today. I am mystified by 2 things. I do not understand why the president decided he had to disagree with his rally audience today. I don't understand why he was more orange today than he has been in a long time, but that's a separate point that I will just leave to the mysteries of the Trump world. But I really don't get what happened here that made him step back and say, I disagree with that rally audience.
Yeah, I think we should take note of this this turn of events, because I think for the last several days, we've heard a lot of pundits, a lot of Trump watchers say, you know, he has a secret plan, that this is a perfect strategy. It's going to help him win his reelection. And like so many things that the president does, it got out of control. You know, what happened last night, I think he recognized, only because Republicans who are up for election recognized that the imagery of this crowd of thousands of mostly white people screaming, "Send her back," to about a woman from Africa who was a refugee who is a citizen of the United States and a congresswoman, was too much for them to bear. And I don't think they had a moral conscience. I think they had a political reckoning, which is the polls show that 60% of Americans think this is racist. Independents think the president is, majority think his behavior is racist. And he was looking at a political problem and actually did an about-face. So the idea that he has master strategy should also go out the window this evening.
Renee Graham, your reaction to what we saw the president do today and this story as it's unfolded?
Well, I think what I found interesting about it is when he made the comment, you know, I tried to stop it. Unless he was trying to do it telepathically with his supporters, I certainly didn't see it. He also doesn't express disapproval with what's going on. He sort of stands there passively for about 15 minutes while this chant is continuing. And it made me wonder, was this even spontaneous? You know, the chant has that same rat-a-tat rhythm as "lock her up." So are we to believe that his supporters just spontaneously came with his chant and he knew nothing about it? He doesn't seem at all surprised when it occurs. The fact that he then sat today and said, well, I disagree with it, you know, I think he's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to make it seem like somehow he was the innocent in all of this and that this was just something that happened with his supporters while not even bothering to acknowledge how much his own rhetoric was ramping them up.
You know, Renee, I wondered that same thing.
And let's be honest, the audience is basically saying what Trump has been saying.
Yes.
I mean, this is what's so weird about this whole thing. He's like, I disagree with what they said, but I'm the one who said it day after day after day. So does he substantively disagree with himself? I mean, obviously this whole thing is ridiculous and absurd. The crowd is simply giving back to Trump what they think he is saying himself and has been saying, which is essentially that Ilhan Omar is that the American who's a legal immigrant, essentially not American, is itself un-American. And they've lost this policy and political debate, and they have to retreat. We'll see. We'll see if he tweets the same stuff this weekend. But at least for the day, it seems like he's recognized he's gone too far.
The Charlotte Observer editorial board is, of course, saddened by this event and doubly saddened that it happened in their state of North Carolina. They wrote, "Send her back," Donald Trump's supporters chanted, without seeing the irony that it was they who were moving backward. "Send her back," they cried. And it was both a reminder and a warning that here in North Carolina, in America, going back is not that far a journey. And Renee, I thought that was a very powerful point that they were making. One of the things we've been hearing people say a lot, and I understand politicians saying it because they take a more optimistic view of things generally than a lot of the rest of us, that we are better than this, the "we are better than this" chant. And it turns out, no, we're not. A minimum of 40% of us are not better than this. And that's on display in that kind of rally.
Well, you know, I think that's often the problem when we have some sort of an incident like this, and the first thing is like, this isn't who we are, we're better than this. No, this is exactly who America is. This is exactly who we are. And we are this because we've not dealt with these issues for centuries. You know, it's always easy to sort of look at Donald Trump and say, oh, God, this started in November of 2016. It didn't. It started centuries before. And because it's gone unattended for so long, we now have a president who can stand in an arena in front of thousands of people and encourage his supporters to say, send her back, about a sitting congresswoman who is an American citizen. So there's always this feeling of, wow, we need to be better than this. Well, let's actually do that. You You know, Donald Trump doesn't become president if we had actually been better than this.
And Neri, you know, as the news of the day developed, I knew two things for sure were going to be in these first minutes of tonight's program. One, the John McCain video, and the other, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez video that I remember watching during Chris Hayes' town hall, which was held in her congressional district. Those were her people filling up that hall on climate change. And when one of the people she was debating disagreed with her in a way the audience didn't like, they started to chant. You saw it. They started to yell at him. And you saw what she did. And that point that she made, that's the difference between her and Trump, is so true. And it is the tip of the iceberg of the difference between her and Trump.
It's there, absolutely, but the real difference is leadership, and leadership is telling your supporters, not just the people you disagree with, but your supporters, that you have to actually hear from the other side, and we haven't heard that in years from Donald Trump.
Neera Tanden and Renee Graham, thank you very much for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it. And when we come back, more members of the House of Representatives now support impeachment, as they showed in a symbolic procedural vote on the House floor yesterday. One of the Democrats who voted to support impeachment yesterday on the House floor will join us next. And is individual one going to get away with committing the crimes that Michael Cohen is currently in prison for? The Justice Department has officially closed the investigation of the Michael Cohen case, which means it has closed its investigation, apparently, of President Trump's involvement in the Michael Cohen case. But former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner says he doesn't think it's over. And that makes two of us. And later, presidential candidate Congressman Al Green, in reaction to the president's tweeted comments that the House of Representatives voted to condemn as racist. The impeachment resolution had nothing to do with the Mueller investigation and referred only to the president being unfit for office because of the language that he has used recently about members of Congress and immigrants and asylum seekers, as is common with resolutions like that, which virtually every Democrat agrees with, at least in part. The Democratic leadership used the procedural device of a vote on tabling the motion, basically putting it to the side, so that technically the vote wasn't directly on the issue of impeachment. The vote was simply on whether to proceed with that resolution and send it to the Senate or to delay the resolution. 95 Democrats voted not to table the resolution, which means we have a new count of House Democrats in favor of impeachment. 95 is significantly higher than the number of Democrats who prior to yesterday have publicly taken a position in favor of impeachment. And we're joined now by one of those 95 Democrats, Democratic Congresswoman Robin Kelly of Illinois. She's a member of the House Oversight Committee. I think there was no surprise about what was going to happen on that motion to table yesterday, but I was struck by, and by the way, many people in favor of impeachment actually stood and voted against it, saying, because what it would have done is simply sent it straight to the United States Senate without any Judiciary Committee hearings on impeachment. But you could also see in that vote of 95 the frustration of where the House of Representatives is on impeachment now.
I think that's exactly what it is. People are frustrated. They were disgusted by his tweets and his comments. And I know for me, I felt like I had to vote the way I voted because I was so frustrated, and just to send some kind of message to my constituents that this man needs to go. And we also realize that even if we do impeach him, that Mitch McConnell's not going to do anything, but it's just that's how frustrated my colleagues and I are at this point.
And today, continuing to show that you can legislate and investigate and condemn at the same time, the House passed the biggest increase in the minimum wage in the minimum wage history, $15 minimum wage, knowing that Mitch McConnell will never take it up on the Senate floor. So what is the difference between the House Democratic leadership's approach to legislation like the minimum wage, which they know Mitch McConnell won't bring to a vote in the Senate, and impeachment, which they also know would have trouble, to put it mildly, in the Senate?
You know, I think with impeachment, we're walking a fine line. We just got back the majority, and we know the reason we got back the majority is because so many of our new colleagues flipped Republican seats. So we have to be strategic in what we do, and we have to make sure we're attracting the people that we lost. We have to make sure we're attracting independents, and you know, there's still many people, despite the president, they don't want us to go through the impeachment. You know, they want us to take care of business. In fact, on my way over here, the person that drove me said, you know, the regular everyday person doesn't care about some of the things that you guys, you know, keep talking about. They care if they have a job, they care about their health care, about their taxes. So, you know, I think that's part of it too, striking a balance.
I want to listen to what Congresswoman Omar said today about her safety, given that the president is in effect publicly inviting threats to her. Let's listen to that.
I am not. What I'm scared for is the safety for people who share my identities. When you have a president who clearly thinks someone like me should go back, right. The message that he's sending is not to me, is to every single person who shares an identity with me. And he's telling them, you guys are going to be all right? He's telling them that this is not their country.
She says she's not afraid for her safety. Are you afraid for her safety?
Yes, I'm afraid for her safety and the others also, but particularly her safety. And I'm sure she has some concerns and about her safety also. I hope she does, and that of her family also.
And what is it like day to day now when serving in the House, where you don't know who's next, you don't know who's the president going to target next? I think you can be absolutely sure he's going to be targeting Congresswoman Omar for a long time, and the four that he's already been targeting. But this is not something that prior to the Trump era.
Absolutely ridiculous. It's embarrassing. It's almost, I would say, unbelievable, but he does something new every week. But he's really, as my grandmother would say, really getting into the gutter. And it's scary what happened in North Carolina yesterday. So many people shouting "Send her back" and applauding him, saying he's not a racist. That's very scary that these are citizens of the United States.
Congresswoman Robin Kelly, thank you very much for joining us.
Zach.
Really appreciate you being here. And when we come back, could individual one be prosecuted for the same crimes Michael Cohen is now ordered the release of some investigative documents in the case of Michael Cohen, now that the Justice Department says it has closed the investigation. Those documents detail the timing of phone calls between Michael Cohen and the president and Hope Hicks and others engaged in trying to cover up Donald Trump's relationships with Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal during the presidential campaign. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, sent a letter to Hope Hicks today demanding that she return to the committee because her previous testimony, quote, appears to be inconsistent with evidence unsealed this morning by a federal judge in New York. But the biggest mystery about the Justice Department closing the case is the fact that federal prosecutors in court said that Michael Cohen committed the crimes he is now in prison for, quote, in coordination with and at the direction of individual one, who is, of course, Donald Trump. The charges that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to say that he committed crimes with Donald Trump and at the direction of Donald Trump in order to help Donald Trump win the presidential election in a conspiracy against the United States of America. If Attorney General William Barr shut down this investigation simply to protect the president, what prevents the next Attorney General appointed by the next president from reopening this investigation and charging individual one with exactly the same crimes Michael Cohen is now in prison for? For the answer to that, we turn to Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. And Glenn, so glad you could be here. I've been wondering this all day. If this is William Barr shutting down this investigation, which is only one of the possibilities in front of us. Let's deal with this one first. If that's what it is, shutting it down to protect the president, if just over 18 months from now we swear in a new president and then get a new attorney general, can it be reopened?
You know, it can be reopened, Lawrence. It should be reopened. But here's the thing. I don't know that it needs to be reopened, and here's why. As you set out in your run-up to this segment, we already have more than enough evidence to prove that, together with Michael Cohen, then candidate Trump broke the law, campaign finance violations. So because we already had that evidence, it's been reinforced and corroborated by the release of the documents that we saw today. But because we already had that evidence, I think the only thing stopping the Southern District of New York from indicting Trump right now is that ill-advised OLC memo that says you can't indict a sitting president. So if a Democrat wins in 2020, and a rational attorney general, one who actually represents the people and not the president, is nominated and confirmed, I don't even know that he or she would have to reopen the investigation. All that person would have to do is tell the Southern District of New York prosecutors, now, with all of the evidence that you collected previously, I want you to prepare an indictment. And that's what I expect will happen. I think that I can't speak for the Southern District of New York prosecutors, but I can speak as a prosecutor for 30 years. What I see publicly reported would lead me to draft up an indictment for President Trump, both a conspiracy charge for acting with Michael Cohen and a felony campaign finance violation charge. And on the day President Trump became private citizen Trump, I would walk into the grand jury, present that indictment, and ask them to return those charges against former President Trump.
Congressman Adam Schiff, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, who is himself a former federal prosecutor, said this today: the inescapable conclusion from all of the public materials available now is that there was ample evidence to charge Donald Trump with the same criminal election law violations for which Michael Cohen pled guilty and is now serving time in prison. Glenn, let's look at this in another frame. Let's presume no William Barr interference, nothing illicit going on in the decisions being made in the Southern District of New York. How would you explain the closing of the investigation without introducing the concept of some kind of protective element for the president in it?
So here's how I would explain that. When you read the judge's order, when he was saying, I've taken the prosecutor's position under advisement, and I'm deciding that there no longer is a basis to continue to have these documents under seal because the public has a right to know. All that means is the investigation itself has been run to ground. The prosecutors and the FBI agents working this particular investigation have done everything they need to do. Therefore, there's no longer a risk of interfering with the investigation if the judge were to unseal the documents. That, I suggest, Lawrence, is different from somebody concluding that the Southern District of New York doesn't have enough to prosecute, will not prosecute now, will not prosecute ever. I suspect the only thing stopping the Southern District of New York from prosecuting right now is the OLC memo. And I don't think there's any inconsistency between them announcing, okay, Judge, we don't have an ongoing investigative reason to keep these matters under seal anymore, but that doesn't mean we're not going to charge the president in the future. I would say stay tuned, and I would bet those Southern District of New York prosecutors who, as you said, already announced in open court through Michael Cohen's guilty plea that the president participated in these crimes, I'll bet they're champing at the bit to go ahead and move forward. They just can't do it because that ill-advised OLC memo says they can't.
Glenn, quickly, could this be the Southern District, say, in effect, offering up their material to a possible impeachment investigation?
You know, that's a great point, because just as Bob Mueller said, he wouldn't come right out and say the president committed obstruction of justice offenses because that was up to the Congress. There is a parallel between that and the Southern District of New York saying, okay, here are all the materials. Our investigation has concluded, but we can't charge anybody. So, Congress, why don't you take it from here? Because you're the one empowered by the Constitution to now hold this president accountable.
Glenn Kirshner, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And when we come back, should the next Attorney General appointed by the next president reopen the case of individual one? I will ask presidential candidate Julian Castro. Next, Congresswoman.
I've personally been told that. Go back to where you came from. It is vile. It is ignorant. It is shallow. It is hateful. And it has to stop. It has to stop.
This is the most racist outbreak statements from a president that I have heard in my lifetime, and it must be universally condemned.
It was despicable to stand and attack those 4 women in the way he did, talking about them going back home. The racist basic taunts.
He's trying to stir up as much hatred and dissension in this country as possible because it serves his political ends.
Joining us now is another Democratic candidate for president, Julian Castro, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration and the former mayor of San Antonio, Texas. Secretary Castro, welcome to The Last Word, and I want to get your reaction to the president's tweeted attacks against the 4 congresswomen and what he had to say about them for 15 minutes at his rally last night, along with the surprise today that he seems to at least want to publicly claim that he disagrees with his audience chanting, "Send her back."
Well, and thanks for having me, Lawrence. His behavior, his comments are disgusting. They're racist. We have not seen, at least in the last 50 years, a politician who has made his career as successfully as Donald Trump by trying to divide Americans along racial, ethnic, and religious lines. This is racial priming. He is the biggest identity politician that there is. And, the rally yesterday was one great example of that. These tropes that he's using about go back and the comments from the crowd about send her back. This is hearkening an era that we thought that, we were making good progress in our country getting past. But he's bringing us right back. He's moving this nation backward in a very tangible way and making life more difficult, not only for the 4 congresswomen, certainly for them, but also for school children that are out there, that may be black or they may be Muslim, maybe they're Latino or Asian American, but in the classroom that they go to, they're the other. And their classmates are more likely to see them as the other because of this president's words and his actions. So he's hurting our country by doing it.
Is that something you've experienced? Anyone saying to you at any point in the course of your life, go back where you came from?
Oh, well, absolutely in politics. I mean, whether it's emails or these days on Twitter, a few years ago it was more old-fashioned letters when I was a younger city councilman. Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many candidates of color, politicians that are minorities that haven't gotten some sort of comments along those lines. I've gotten plenty over the years. Let me contrast that to an experience I had last year. I was at the Ursula Processing Center in McAllen with a group of activists to protest the family separation policy of this administration. And as sad as what was happening in that center on the border was with children and their families, what gave me hope is that the activists that were there, they were white, they were black, they were Latino, Asian American, Native American, they were from different parts of the country. So you could see that the values that people have of basic respect for humanity, of compassion, of understanding, of love, of reaching out a hand to people in need, those are stronger than the division and the fear and the paranoia that this president is trying to stoke for his own political ends.
The Justice Department has apparently closed the investigation of the Michael Cohen case, in which federal prosecutors said that Donald Trump ordered Michael Cohen, directed him to commit those crimes, and committed those crimes with him, the crimes for which Michael Cohen is in prison tonight. If you're elected president, would your attorney general reopen that investigation and examine indicting Donald Trump?
If I'm elected president, this is what I'll tell my attorney general. you treat him